This is Me Before Mom, the podcast that helps moms stay connected to themselves while doing the most important job they'll ever have. And I'm your host, Bert Anderson. Hey everybody, this is Bert and you are listening to Me Before Mom. So today, our topic is not touchy. It's something we don't like to talk about. It's a little awkward for me, but I have been thinking about the concept of race and white privilege, I would say for 6 months now, just kind of mulling it over in my head, trying to understand the concept of white privilege. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but I have felt convicted and like I need to kind of figure out what this means because I am raising white middle-class children. I have a son and I have 2 girls. And I grew up in the military. I'm a military brat. And so we lived in Japan when I was 2 years old when we moved there and I was 5 when we left. And I have just seen the world, from a very young age. And it's just happened very organically for me. And my children are not going to have that experience at all. They're not going to understand that, the way we do things in Minnesota is not the only way things are done. They are not going to ever have the experience of being the minority in the school. I had that experience when I went to, we lived in Germany, and I went to it wasn't a military school in the way you might be thinking. I'm talking about military school, but the military has their own school system for kids who are overseas, and it's called the Department of Defense school. So I went to junior high, Ramstein Junior High School, and, the white kids were not the majority. And my kids, I don't know if they will ever experience that in their life. And so I distinctly remember, this is, just this whole concept of race and trying to understand what it means and how to parent my own children so that they grow up and that they are advocates for people who can't stand up for themselves. And I want them to see how privileged they are and then fight against that, if that makes sense. So, like I said, this is an open discussion. I'm talking about it. You can totally join in, follow my Facebook page or the Matriarch page, and their accounts will have those in the show notes for you. But it's a conversation that I think we need to have. If we are going to have change in this world that we're living in the United States, we have got to wake up and understand how things really are. And putting our head in the sand and pretending that we're not privileged because of the colors of our skin, it's foolish and it's irresponsible. So I have a blogging acquaintance who wrote an article, and I don't exactly remember what the full title of the article was, but the premise of her article is if you are white and you live in America, you are a racist. And at first I was like, really? And then I read her article, and here was her point. She was like, I am a white, upper middle class woman in America. You can argue with me that I'm not a racist, but I'll tell you why. And she told this story about how she, before she became an influencer and worked from home, she worked in the district attorney's office. And she worked, I think she was actually in the parole office. And so a lot of people who were on parole would come in or whatever. One day she was in an elevator, and there was a black man who was in there with her and they were both in there at the same time. And she said that, he was very tall, very large. And I guess the elevator had a tendency to kind of get stuck. It would like go down a floor before it went up a floor. And so she said that he that this happened in the course of them being in this elevator. And when she first walked in, she said she saw him and there was immediately she kind of felt this twinge of like, oh, I'm scared. And then when this elevator situation happened and it kind of like, did its weird thing, she looked at him because she could tell that he was uncomfortable. And she said, don't worry, it happens all the time. And then she said, he said in a higher voice than what she thought he was going to have, well, thank goodness that you said that and that you're here with me because I was really freaked out. And she said, like, just hearing that he was scared just because they're in this elevator together, like that this elevator is doing this weird thing, she was confronted with her own bias right there in that moment. She made a snap judgment when she stepped into that elevator, and that judgment was, oh, I'm going to be, I need to watch myself because there's this, big black man in the elevator with me who, when he talked, had a higher voice than what she was imagining he would. And he was actually nervous. and she said, and that is when I was confronted with the fact that I have ingrained in me, simply because I am this white, middle class woman, that I do look at people and make snap judgments about them based on the color of their skin. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't notice the color of somebody's skin, because that's stupid. It's stupid. We are all different colors, obviously. The problem, I think, and what I want to try to teach my kids is that, if they pass by if they walk down the hall, or if they pass by somebody who is a person of color, it's just like passing by, somebody who is not and who looks just like them. Like there should be no difference. So it's hard. This is a hard conversation to have, but it's a conversation that I think that we have to have. And I think as white American women, we need to be willing to look at it in the face and then help our kids navigate around it. And in order to do that, you kind of have to deal with the messiness of it. When I moved from Germany, where I was in the Department of Defense school, to New Jersey, I remember, I think it was like the first or second week of school. I was the new kid, but I remember going home and saying to my mom, I was so amazed because everybody looked like me. I was like, Mom, they all look like me. Like there is not one black person in this school. Like, not one. And I didn't like it. But when you're in, especially if you're a military brat, you learn how to assimilate to the culture around you. So you fit in fast because you only have a little bit of time to fit in. And so I, for the next 3 years, I moved to my sophomore year. But so the next 3 years I was surrounded by all white people, and I got used to it again. And then I went to college, and I went to a small private school in Minnesota. And again, I was surrounded by all white people. And I remember they kind of forced the diversity and race and ethnicity stuff down our throats. At least that's what it felt like. Looking back on it now, I'm very thankful for it, that they kind of like addressed race and addressed privilege. And, and me and my young 20 self, I was like, there's not a problem with it. And I don't see color. The world is colorblind. And I had this professor who was white, and she was married to a black man. And she said to us, what did she teach? She taught like, it was a psychology course. I don't know. Social ethics, I think is what it was. But she said, she was like, it is not a problem to look at somebody and say, oh, she's black. Or it's the same thing as looking at somebody and saying, oh, they have red hair. My sister is a redhead. And when people see her, they see her red hair. It's not a bad thing to notice how somebody looks. The difference is when you make those snap judgments and respond that way. I heard another story because I was listening to this podcast, because like I said, I've been thinking about this for 6 months. I listened to a podcast, and this guy told this story. He went to a small private school in Illinois, and he grew up around white people. He was Black, and he said he was meeting his friend, and his friend was sleeping in. He was picking him up outside of his house, and it was early in the morning, and so they had agreed that he was just going to park outside on the street, and then his friend would come and see, his friend would just come in, whatever. Completely white neighborhood, whatever. His friend overslept, and this was, before cell phones. The guy who was telling this story is saying, he's sitting in his car, and all of a sudden he looks up and he looks around and he sees a number of houses, and people are, peeking behind the curtains looking at him. And sure enough, about 2 minutes later, a cop comes and asks him, "What are you doing?" And at this point, his friend was up, and the parents were also up, and they saw the cops. And then the parents came out and they said, "Everything's fine. This is, so-and-so." And, and he's like, I'm just waiting for my friend, officer. That right there, that's what I'm talking about. That is what I'm trying to fight against with my kids. That feeling of, just because somebody looks different than you because of the color of their skin, maybe even the way they dress, it doesn't give you a right to all of a sudden feel uneasy. I'm not saying, just be dumb and accept everybody. You should be, somewhat street smart, but that doesn't mean that you assume the worst in people. I was having a discussion with my kids about this, I don't remember when it was. I had been thinking about it for a month, and I was really hyped up. I had Googled how to teach white kids about white privilege. And I was like, I'm going to do this. And I still have yet to get all these books, but there was this fabulous book. I will link it. I will put it in the show notes for you guys. It was a list of books of how to teach kids about white privilege. It was on Huffington Post. And there were all these different books. There was a book about, a boy who wanted to play baseball and wasn't allowed to play baseball. But my kids and I, so we were sitting and I was talking to them about this, and I was like, guys, you have to understand that because you are white, there are things that you will be allowed to do and opportunities that you will have that your friends who are not white will not have. They will have to fight harder for it and work harder to get it. And that is wrong. And they're looking, and we've talked about this before because my kids have asked questions, when their sister, my husband's sister, is Korean. She was adopted. And so they will ask, well, why does Auntie Leah look different? And, so we'll talk about, well, this is why and stuff. And I don't remember why. One of them was asking me one time, why do some people have really, really dark skin? Why do Black people have dark skin and white people don't? So we talked about the equator, and, we'll think about where they're from. And isn't this smart that they're able to be closer to the equator and their skin is darker? And this is, this is not a bad thing. This is a smart thing. They can live, in Africa. And so we've had those kind of basic conversations, but I hadn't up until that point said to them, just sat down with them and said, okay, this is how the world is, and it is wrong, but you can change this. And we're still having those conversations, but my son was starting to understand it a little bit. He, I was like, if you pass by somebody, or if you see somebody who's Black, and you walk by them on the street, your first response should not be to move 2 or 3 feet away. That's just dumb. I mean, if you're taking up the whole sidewalk, you should, but you shouldn't be afraid of people just because of the color of their skin. I don't know. Maybe I'm rambling now. I'm coming at this with you, kind of still wrestling with it, because I really, deep in my heart, feel like we have got to address this. And I feel like almost like our generation is at this point where we can make a big change in raising our kids so that some of this racism stuff starts to not settle down, because I don't know if it ever will, because it's so deeply ingrained, but if we can at least stand up against like the Starbucks employees who call because people are, two black men are sitting in their coffee shop. We have to be the ones to raise up a generation who's going to be an advocate for people who cannot speak up because the entire society that they're living in is against them. And we have to be willing to look inward at ourselves and see how the society that we're in has influenced ourselves, influenced the way we look at things. Just like I said, how, moving from, a very diverse middle school into an all-white high school really was dramatically different for me. And then, and I felt uncomfortable at first, and then I assimilated, and then I fit in. That's just, it's interesting. Race is interesting. I remember when we moved from Grand Forks, North Dakota, we moved to Biloxi, Mississippi. You could not be it was so diametrically opposed from each other. It was shocking. But I remember that was like the first time I was in 5th grade, and that was the first time that I really understood that this race thing was a big deal. And we were driving someplace, and I saw a Confederate flag in the yard of someone's house. And I remember saying to my mom, I was like, Mom, why on earth do they have that? And she was like, because for some people, it still means a lot. And this is what it means. And so then we, kind of had this conversation about race and the Civil War, and all these, and it felt messy, and it still feels messy, but at the same time, it was nice to know that I could at least talk about it. And I think we just need to be open to talking about it. Now, I'm not saying go out and find like a black friend or your one black friend and ask them to explain to you what white privilege is. Just don't do that. It's really offensive. It would be like if you came to me and said, Bert, you used a nipple shield, and I think that's so wrong, but you should tell me why it's not. Like, it's just like, don't. That was a bad example. I have nothing to compare it to, but don't do that. Actually, we'll put in the show notes, because I don't have my phone in front of me or anything in front of me to talk about resources, but in the show notes, we will put resources for you on how to learn more about this and become more educated, because it's something that we really do need to talk about. I mean, it really is. And yeah, this is kind of a me before mom talk. I'm not talking about finding your passions or anything like that, but I am talking about raising adults who contribute to the good of society. And if we're going to do that, we do have to look inwardly at ourselves. And whether you want to admit it or not, race is a big thing. It's a big thing. You can't just turn a blind eye to it or stick your head in the sand and hope that somebody someday is going to do something about it. You have to be the person who does something about it. And the best thing that we can do is talk about it with our kids and wrestle with it within ourselves. That's really all I have to say. I would love to continue this conversation with you guys. If you have any experiences, of ways you've talked to your kids about this, if you think I'm absolutely crazy, whatever, dialogue with me, talk with me, share with me your books and your resources. I want to know all that stuff. I want to know all the things. And through all of this, as you are inwardly looking at your own prejudice and your white privilege, if you're listening to this and you're white, be kind to yourself, especially doing this. Just be kind. That's all we have. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to connect with me on bertmanderson.com, and please visit our website, matriarchdm.com, for all of the show notes and to hear other awesome podcasts.